distinguished deans, Magidei Shiur. It's an honor to be here today in the presence of our respected lay leaders, the family of Dr. Belkin, who are listening online, and all of the Talmidim who are here with us this morning. It's my honor to speak in the Beis Medrash in memory of our past and our history. From its inception, our yeshiva has been named for the universally recognized Gadol Adar of the previous generation, Rabbi Yitzchak, Elchanan, Spektor, who was not only the leading posek of his time, but an advocate for Torah values when they were under siege, as well as Rabbi Dr. Samuel Belkin, who in the face of great uncertainty for traditional Judaism in the second half of the 20th century, developed and grew the school's stature and scholarship of this beloved institution. What distinguishes both of these leaders was their ability to lead the Jewish people specifically during times of crisis and opportunity. It was specifically when the stakes were so high, deliberately when there was much to lose, that their belief and optimism in the Jewish future was most impactful. Their lives and legacy continue to animate our yeshiva, and their leadership and resilience continues to inspire. For us this year, we have felt the sense of the crisis of the stakes being high. When the stakes are high, we see leaders born. Moments of great consequence reveal and create character as our truest selves often emerge from the cauldron of crisis. And this is what we've seen in some measure during this past year. In the way we masked, practiced social distancing, and maintained proper safety measures, our actions had the potential to either save lives or put other people at risk. Moreover, as a community identified by our faith, our collective decisions carried the possibility of either desecrating or sanctifying God's name. There was much at stake this year, and as such, we're required to act deliberately and consciously each and every step of the way. I remember when it all started. It was about a year ago. I was in my office and received a call. We have a student who is tested or being tested for COVID. At the time, no one knew about COVID, and there was absolutely no script to follow. We were only the second university in the country to have a suspected COVID case, and the first in this part of the country. The next day, I received a phone call at 7:10 a.m. Governor Cuomo wanted to speak to me. The governor calls me and he says, "Rabbi Berman, if I'm calling you this early in the morning, it must be that I do not have good news." He said he told me that our student tested positive, and he asked to meet with me in a conference of institutions that have been affected by COVID in New York and the United States. So he came to the meeting place 1 o'clock that day in Riverdale. The governor was there, Dr. Zucker, the state medical expert, was there, and all of the institutions affected by COVID. It was like an RCA convention. Who are the institutions affected by COVID? It was the Young Israel of New Rochelle, it was SAR, it was Westchester Day School, it was my chaverim from YU, the alum from YU I went to Shiur. We're all sitting with the governor talking about what is going to be New York's response to the COVID crisis. The New York City Department of Health was embedded in our campus, and we were working and making decisions on the latest available medical opinions, whether we should stay open or shut down. How do we communicate what's happening, not just to our students, but to our community? We were not only the first university to shut down, we were also the first university to reopen online. Like weeks before, we had I remember the senior leadership conversation when it was brought up that there was such a thing as COVID. Maybe just in case it comes, we have to have the internet capacity. That if we had to go all online, we'd be able to go online. And we got that before we heard the news. And then it happened, and our whole emergency response planning moved into action. The Department of Health told us months later that universities and institutions followed our precedents. That while we had no script, others already had a model. They saw what we did, and it influenced how they acted. Dean Wasserman mentioned to me that the dean of Harvard Business School called him to ask advice about how they should go online. Okay, because we were the first. We were pioneers. Not what I thought I'd be pioneers in, but this is the area where Hashem placed us to be able to lead and lead with our values. Since last March, we have brought the entire university together. We've been working 24/6 on this crisis. Weekly meetings, regular meetings, how we're going to respond and how we're going to move ahead. The big shift, of course, is that we reopened in person. I just had a meeting with other presidents of universities, and they were all talking about their challenge because they're going to start in person in the fall. And they had all these questions. I'm like, you're kidding me. Those are your questions? How are you going to start in person in the fall? This is 7 months behind us. We're already reopened. We opened at the end of October. You know, they came to me in the beginning and they said, okay, we have to make sure that the campus is safe. I said, great, what do we need to do? He said, well, the state requirements is that we have to test 20% of our student body once a week. And I said, are you crazy? We're testing 100% of our student body twice a week. And these are our children. It's not taking risks here. And Baruch Hashem, we've been able to create a safe campus and the testing protocol that Hashem has blessed us, and it's all siyata d'shmaya. Everything we do is siyata d'shmaya. And it's only with siyata d'shmaya that we can continue. And who knows, there's still twists and turns on the way ahead. But with siyata d'shmaya, we've been able to move forward. But the stakes have been high. The health stakes, our students, your education, your lives, our community, our values, all were on the public stage. This has been what this whole year has been about. And in fact, this sense of high stakes is at the core of the holiday of Pesach. And as such, I think it's particularly fitting that we're learning Maseches Pesachim this year, and I think it carries a unique message for us today. Let me explain. The key is Chametz and Matzoh. Now, Chametz and Matzoh are two separate mitzvos. There's a prohibition, the Issue of Chametz, Oni Chametz, eating Chametz, Chiyuv Kares, the Isurim that deal with Chametz. And there's a positive mitzvah, Leil Seder, to eat matzah, positive mitzvah. You know, conceptually, they're independent from one another. One could not eat her own chametz without being obligated to eat matzah, and one could be commanded to eat matzah without being chayiv kares for eating chametz. Where do we see that, in fact, they can conceptually be split? Where do we have a case where they're obviously split? Pesach Sheni. So you see that conceptually, one doesn't need to be integrated with the other. But yet in halacha, we find a deep connection between them. So it starts with the psukim. So everybody have the source sheets. If you look at source number 1, by the bold, Tochal of chametz, shivas yamim tochal of matzos lechem oni. Pasuk says you shouldn't eat chametz 7 days, you should eat matzah, and matzah is lechem oni, which we'll talk about what that means. The Torah links repeatedly in its presentation of chametz and matzah, it repeatedly links these two mitzvot. But this isn't just a textual link, but the halacha links them as well. So if you think about, let's take the ingredients of what makes chametz and matzah. What is the ingredients? How do you make chametz and matzah? So on the one hand, you need flour, and the other you need liquid, two things, flour and some liquid. You put them together, you knead it, and it's dough. Dough can then be baked and made matzah, or it can let rise and be made chametz. So you need two separate ingredients. You need the flour, and you need the liquid. What type of flour does one need in order to make matzah? What type of flour? So if you look at source number 2, the Mishnah teaches us what type of flour. Elu dvarim she'adam yotze ben yedei chavaso b'Pesach, b'chitim, b'sarim, b'kusmim, b'shifim, b'shabal shual. The 5 grains of wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats. The 5 grains. If you have flour of these 5 grains, this is what you can use for matzah. The Gemara asks, if you look lower by the bold, there are other cereal grains as well. Hani in, orez v'duchen lo. These you can use, but you can't use rice and millet. Minani mili, how do I know? Amar Reb Shimon ben Shlakish v'chein tana Rabbi Yishma v'chein tana dvei Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Amakra quotes the pasuk we mentioned before. Lo tochal of chametz shivas yamim tochal of matzos. The Torah connects chametz to matzah. Dvarim haba'am lidei chimutz adam yotze ben yidei chavaso b'matzah. Yatzu elu she'ein ba'am lidei chimutz el lidei sirchon. What is the lesson of the connection between chametz and matzah? Only flour, which can become chametz, you can use for matzah. But flour that can't be chametz, but if it's put together with water, it doesn't leaven, but it spoils, that cannot be used for matzah. So just to, again, explain, what happens what is chametz? You take your flour, and put it with water, and you let it rise and leaven. It cracks, it rises, that's chametz. If you put it into the oven beforehand, you could stop it, it becomes matzah. But if you use rice or millet and you put water in it, the Gemara says it doesn't leaven, it spoils. And therefore, the lesson that the Gemara learns is that the wheat that you use, the wheat has to be leavenable. The 5 grains, they have to be leavenable. And if they're not leavenable, they can't be used to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah on Leil Seder. You can't use it to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah on Leil Seder. That's one of the ingredients, the wheat. What about the liquid? What can you use for liquid? Of course, you could use water. What about other kinds of liquid? So what about mei peiros? Can you use mei peiros in order to create for the dough for matzah? So look at source number 3. The Gemara first teaches, Amar Rabbi Bar Chana Amar Reish Lakish, Isa shenilusha beyayin v'shemen udvash, ein chayavan al chimutz hakaris. First of all, you should know that if you need the 5 grains, if you need wheat with wine, oil, or honey, you're not chayiv karis. That mixture, you let it go, that mixture you will not be chayiv karisin for eating chametz. Why not? So look at the end of the Gemara. I know time the Reish Lakish. Mishum dahavilu mei peiros, mei peiros ein machmitzin. Because this is mei peiros. Mei peiros doesn't leaven. What leavens? You need water to make the flour rise. Fruit juice, or in this case, oil, wine, honey. You cannot use, if it goes into the flour, it does not create chametz. Okay, it doesn't create chametz. But can you use it to create matzah? Can you use shemen, yayin, and dvash to create matzah? So here we have another Gemara. If you turn to source number 4, we'll focus on the position of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says in Psachim Lamavav and Aleph that because it says lechem oni, so we learn from there that the lechem that you use on Seder night has to be poor man's bread. What is poor man's bread? Flour that's mixed together with water. But matzah ashira, flour mixed together with wine, oil, or dvash, that's not lechamoni. That you can't use l'al seder. So if you look at the bowl, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Imke my time elomer lechamoni, prat li isha shenilusha beyayin v'shemen dvash. My time in Rabbi Akiva, miksiv lechamoni, aniksiv. That's where he learns from the pasuk. The Gemara asked, but I don't understand. There's a stira. We know from another brisa, the Rabbi Akiva said that he does need the dough with wine, oil, and honey on Pesach. How can Rabbi Akiva say that he needs dough with wine, oil, and honey on Pesach when he says he can't fulfill the mitzvah of matzah the night before? So the Gemara answers by bringing a story of Rabbi Shiur ben Levi. Rabbi Shiur ben Levi told his children that on the first day, the first night, you cannot knead with wine, oil, dvash, but the second day and on you can. The Gemara says that's the position of Rabbi Akiva. There's a difference, of course. The first night is lachamoni. You need matzah shir, doesn't work. So if you use dvash, yayin, and shemen, it's not going to work because of this separate din of lechem oni. But the rest of the days of the Pesach you could use. It's not a problem. Okay, very clear. So let me ask you a question based on this. Let's say you don't use dvash, yayin, and shemen, which make it matzah shira, but instead you use apple juice or orange juice in the dough. Can you use that to bake matzah for Leil Seder? Can you use that to make matzah for Leil Seder? Okay, so I have one no. It's good. So let me first start with yes, then we'll get to no. So the Rambam says, well, based on all these Gemaros, he thinks it's clear that you should be able to use other liquid. Why? Because if you look at source number 5, Chameshet mine dagan elu im lashen b'mei peres b'vad below shemayim liolam enam bam lidei chimutz. If you take the 5 grains and you don't knead it with water but just mei peros, you know it's not going to leaven. And he says mei peros, yayin, chalav, dvash, zayis, mei tapuchim, mei rimonim. All these things, you know if there's no water, it's not going to leaven. Okay, it's not going to leaven. Now the Rambam also writes in source number, look at 6, in the next parak Vav Halacha Hey. Matzah shalasha b'mei peros, yatsa bo yedei chavasa b'Pesach. If you take flour and knead it with mei peros, you can create mitzvos matzah to eat on Leil Seder. How can you do that? Because the Rambam writes, "Aval ein lashon osam b'yayin shemen dvash u'chalav mishum lechamoni, v'im lash v'achal lo yatzidei chavaso." There's a separate issue of lechamoni. Lechamoni, that applies to oil, to honey, to wine. Only wealthy people would use that to knead their dough. But if you used apple juice, then what's the problem with that? You have the 5 grains. The grain themselves is leavenable. That was the only obligation, yet the grain was leavenable. The liquid, as long as it's not ashira, you could apply, and you know it's ein machmitz and it doesn't leaven. Okay, good. So you don't have to worry. It doesn't leaven. You can put it in its matzah. You don't have to worry that it'll become chametz. You could use those matzos for Leil Seder. You could use those matzos for Leil Seder. That's what the Gemara is saying. Tells you one halacha in Lamed Hey that you need 5 grains, that the grains have to be leavenable. That's the type of grain you use. Like the lulav has to be kapos tamarim. The estrog has to be, that's the type of grain you need. That's a halacha and the kind of grain that you need for the flour. Okay. And there's a separate halacha of lechamoni, that it can't be matzah shira. Matzah shira is wine, it's oil, it's honey. But in between, let's say you use not water, but you use mei peros, apple juice. So then that's fine, it's not ashira. You know it doesn't leaven, great. You use it to make matzah, no problem. Clear? Clear. Any questions on that? Anybody disagree with that? Okay, so I want to introduce you to a very important Ramban that really creates an opportunity to understand deeply what Pesach is all about. Now, by way of a personal backstory, I will tell you that when I approached this year's Shiur, I knew immediately that this would be what I should be speaking about. Because the whole issue of high stakes, and we're about to see more, is it's the theme of this year. So in preparation, I called Rabbi Amori, Rabbi Rosenzweig, to share with him, my ideas for Chametz and Matzah. And as I was talking to him, I realized that, wait 1 second, I heard this from you. And he's like, yeah, no, this is what I say on Chametz and Matzah. And so much of what I think, it's so integrated into my natural thought process, what I've learned from my Rebbeim, specifically Mori Rabbi Rosenzweig, Mori Rabbi Lichtenstein Zatzal. It's hard to even know. It's hard to even know when it's him or who of the two it is. But more importantly, what I wanted to share is calling Rabbi Rosenzweig before and to ask his thoughts is part of me as well. I've done that throughout my life. I always have called Rabbi Rosenzweig to ask him about questions about my life and questions about learning since I was a student here at YU. And this is like perhaps the most special aspect of Yeshiva University, the lifelong relationships that one develops, especially between the Rebbe and the student. And we're talking about the Rebbe, and we're talking about our Gedolei Torah. Gedolei Torah. Just yesterday, I was speaking to a group from IA, our development, certainly a very important part of Yeshiva University, and telling them what makes Yeshiva University unique, what makes us special. And I spoke about our 5 Torot and our core values of truth and life and dignity and compassion and responsibility. And we're all talking about what makes Yeshiva University distinct. And one of the people from IA said, for the students and the parents, in addition to the values and the value, it's really the relationships. It's the care and love that one feels when one is here in YU. From the Rebbeim to the faculty to student support, you don't find this certainly in any other university. You certainly don't find it in any other university. But that you have people who know them and care about them. And I've seen this year, like the commitment all across the board from the administrators, the faculty, the Rebbeim, everyone who just gives so much because they care so much about the students and about you. And now, Baruch Hashem, a new career center and professional network. It's just like that is all part of what makes YU special. And especially when it comes to the yeshiva. Because you're not just talking about a close Rebbe-Talmud relationship. You're talking about relationships with Rosh Yeshiva who are Gedolei Torah, Gedolim in the world. In the world. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, we're sitting in the presence of the greatest Gedolim in the world. And then we have an opportunity to ask them questions and to talk to them and get their guidance, not just when you're in yeshiva, but throughout your life. And they want that. I remember one story. I was in Grus. I was learning in Grus, and I had this real life question. It's really troubling me. And Rabbi Rosenzweig came to visit Israel. Why you sent him? He was staying somewhere. And I called him. I said, I really need to speak to Rabbi. He said, no problem. So he borrowed a car from someone, and he came to Grus, and we spoke. And I remember when we were walking out of Grus, I said to him, do you know where you're going? Now, Rabbi Rosenzweig is one of the great geniuses of our generation. his sense of direction isn't as strong as the sense of the Rishonim. So I said, do you know where you're going? And he's like, no, not really, but I'll find it. I was certain it was the last time I was going to see Rabbi Rosenzweig. I was certain that was but he came to see me knowing how to get there and back because I had a question. I wanted to talk to him about a life question. That's the relationship. That is the kesher that you have with the Rebbeim here. So this is all just by way of a background to this Ramban. This Ramban I was introduced to by Rabbi Mori, Rabbi Rosenzweig. So the Ramban is speaking about this Gemara. It's the Ramban and the Milchamos. So again, the Gemara of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva says that you can't use yayin, shem, and dvash because of lechamoni. Because of lechamoni, it can't be matzah shira on the first night. The Rif, when he records this Gemara, says that it must be that the Rabbi Akiva is talking about when it wasn't just shem and dvash alone, there must have been mayim there also. There must have been water there too. It must have been water, including with shem and dvash. It must have been water also. The Baal Meor disagrees, and he says the Rif is wrong, and he's a couple of disagreements on him. And then you get to the Ramban. So look at the Ramban who defends the Rif. If you look at source number 10. Okay, this is very, very important. The Ramban says that the Rif is right. It needs to be that there's water present. It needs to be that there's water present in Rabbi Akiva on Daf Lamed Vav. Why does it need to be that there's water present? So look at source number 10. V'adayin divrei Baal Meor krovim, al sheyesh lo l'rachkam l'smoch divrei Rabbeinu Hagadol. Although it makes sense what the Baal Meor is saying, but you should distance yourself from the Baal Meor and be somech on the Rif. Why? Shreyaviu b'gemara divrei Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi l'lamed she'ein yotzin b'yom rishon b'matzah shirik divrei Rabbi Akiva. That the Gemara brought Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi to teach that you're not yotzei on the first day of matzah shira like Rabbi Akiva. Ve'im below mayim, and if there was no water there, typically mishum shekol she'enu balidei chimutz ein yotzin bo matzah. If there was no water there, the reason why the first night you wouldn't be able to use this matzah isn't because of lechamoni. Why wouldn't you be able to use it? Because the mixture, the dough, couldn't rise. It's not leavenable if you skip. Ein lecha davar she'enu balidei chimut she'yotzin bo mishamayim da iskush. You cannot be yotzei with matzah if the mixture of the liquid and the flour is not leavenable. Let me say it again. The Gemara in Lamed Hey just tells you, and this is how the Rambam and most would understand it, that the wheat has to be leavenable. It doesn't tell you that the mixture has to be. What the Ramban says is that the only matzah that you could use has to be made from a dough that if you left it alone, it would rise and become chametz. Now, what do you need for a matzah, a dough to rise and become? You need two things. You need the flour to be leavenable, and what else do you need? You need the liquid to be leavenable. We know that shemen and yayin and dvash ain't machmitzin. It doesn't cause it to rise. So you need the liquid to make it rise. And it's only that mixture that is going to rise can you possibly use for matzah. And the only way Rabbi Akiva would say that the reason for the psul is lechem oni is if the mixture itself would have risen by itself. And then you have another reason of lechem oni that, oil, dvash, and yayin is lechem oni, so you can't use it. So according to the Ramban, what the Gemara is teaching you isn't that the flour has to be leavenable. It's that the whole mixture has to be leavenable. Why does the whole mixture have to be leavenable? And here the Ramban adds something amazing. Va'od da be'inon shimor delisha va'afiyah. Tichsiv ushmartem es hamatzos. Yatzah zo she'eno tricha shimor lefi she'eno ba lidei chimot. The Ramban tells you that the reason why is because of Shiur. Now, let's just unpack that for a second. We know that the pasuk says, "Ushmartem es hamatzos." What does it mean, "Ushmartem es hamatzos"? What does that teach you in halacha, "Ushmartem es hamatzos"? What does that teach you? So there are two general approaches to Shmartem es hamatzos. One approach is there's an extra mitzvah of zehirus. You have to be extra careful to make sure that water doesn't fall on the wheat or that it doesn't. There's an extra mitzvah to be careful. That's one approach. And the other approach is lishma. Right? The Gemara, one of the opinions of the Gemara to explain why could you not use chalos toda or rikike nazir? Why can't you use matzah that was made for nazir or for toda? Why can't you use that for Pesach? Because you need to make matzah l'shem Pesach, like similar to stam. You need, it's an amazing chiddush, but in order to create the chefter shel mitzvah, you need the shema. When you make it, you have to do it l'shma. For the shame of purpose of matzah. Shmartem es hamatzos, you have to do it l'shma. What's the nafkamina if it's just extra watching or if it's you need l'shma? So one of the nafkaminas, the machokas already in the time of the Gonim, is can you use a non-Jew, for example? Can a non-Jew be a worker to bake the matzah or not? Or starting from what point in the process? If all you need is zehirus, so you can have a non-Jew there with the Jewish supervisor and you'd be fine. But if you need the shema, that actually the asiyah has to be the shema, so you need an adult Jew in order to make it the shema and to make them. These are the two classic ways of understanding Shmartem es hamatzos. It could be that both dinim are true. It depends on what part of the process, like from the Ksira, it could be Zehirus, and from the Lisha, it could be Lishma. Taz says that it's both. That's the classic Torah on Ushmartem es hamatzos. But the Ramban is saying something else. The Ramban is saying that Shiur is part of the process of making the matzah, which is matzah by definition has to be a dough that is about to become chametz. And the only thing that stops it is your shiur. The shmura is essential in order to define this as the end as matzah. Shmira from chimutz is essential in order to define it as matzah. If there's no shmira from chimutz, it's not matzah. It's not just that the flour has to be leavenable. The whole dough, everything has to be leavenable. And it's the shiur, it's your actions which stop it from becoming chametz. That is what shmira is doing. So according to the Ramban, what you need to do in order to create matzah is to create a situation of risk where it's possible to become chametz. Again, the Rambam doesn't say that. The Rambam says you could use mei peiros, use apple juice, use pomegranate juice. It can't become chametz. Okay, it can't become chametz. It's not matzah shira. You have the 5 wheats. You're good. It's fine. Great. Matzah, use a little seder. For the Ramban, you can't use mei peiros. You can't use apple juice. Not because there's no problem with lechamoni, but it won't leaven. And the whole part of matzah is that you take something which is a risk of becoming chametz and you stop it. It's your shmira. You define it as matzah. Your shmira defines it as matzah. It's the human intervention and deliberate act which turns it into matzah. So this sense that the central definition of matzah is the confrontation with chametz, which is then neutralized by our capacity and vigilance to overcome, is borne out in many Gemaras. Take source number 11, the issue of Tevel. The Mishnah tells us you can't use matzah of Tevel. Okay, why can't you use Tevel? You have wheat. Wheat is leavenable. You put liquid in. Let's say it's even water. So it's rising. Why can't you use Tevel? So the Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan, Yachal Yahrtzeit Nechavasu b'Tevel shlo nitkan, minayin, Tamalomer lo tocho alav chametz. Mishi Yisur mishum bal tocho alav chametz. Yatzah zeh she'eni Yisur mishum bal tocho chametz, el mishum bal tocho Tevel. That bal tocho chametz, the same pasuk we were talking about before, teaches that the only thing that can be used as matzah is something which is over the prohibition of chametz. And this is not over the prohibition of chametz, it violates the prohibition of tevel. And therefore you can't, it's wheat, it leavens, it's water, you stop it, you put it in, but because the Isser isn't chametz, but the Isser is tevel, it can't be used for matzah. So first of all, the Gemara asks, what happened to the Isser of chametz? The Isser of the chametz, eichan azal, why is it not over the Issue of Chametz? So the two answers. Hamani Rabbi Shimoni Damar Ein Isser Chal Isser. The first answer is Ein Isser Chal Isser, meaning the Issue of Tevel is first, and therefore if you hold that one Isser can't be Chal on the other Isser, Chametz never, the Issue of Chametz never applies. And therefore you can't use it as a matzah. The second answer is even more extraordinary. Now Ravina says, Afilu Tamer Rabbanim, you don't hold Ein Isser Chal Isser. So they're both Isurim. There's Tevel and Chametz. Mishi Isur Misham Bal Tochel Chametz Bilvad. Yatzah She'en Isur Misham Bal Tochel Chametz Bilvad. You can only use a mixture, the flour and water of dough, that violates only Bal Tochel Chametz in order to use that for matzah. Again, we're not talking about it becoming chametz. We're using it for matzah. But even if there are two things, even if it's tevel and chametz, it's still not enough. Meaning, the confrontation with chametz has to be so clear. Even if it's usher for chametz, if it's not clear that the isser is chametz, if it's not alone that the isser is chametz, it can't be used for matzah. In the end, the Gemara rejects it. It says, does it say bovad? But really it should be risheshus. But either way, it highlights the same point, that the mitzvah of matzah is fundamentally integrated with the isser of chametz. Similarly, if you look forward by nashim, not just what wheat can be used, not just tevel, the isser, but also who is chayav in matzah. So women, you would think, are pater for matzah. Why should they be pater for matzah? Mitzvah zeishas ma'agrama. So they should be pater for matzah. Why are they chayiv in matzah? So if you look at the Gemara in Mem Gimel, source number 12, the Gemara first of all teaches you that they're chayiv in chametz. Bahasha disrabu b'val tochal chametz, disrabu nami la'achilas matzah. Once you know that they're over the yisr of chametz, so you know they're also included in the positive mitzvah of matzah. Rabbi Elazar, the Amar Elazar, Nashim Chaz B'chis Matzah Dvar Torah, Shenamar Lo Tochol of Chametz, Kol Sheyeshnu B'Val Tochol Chametz, Yeshnu B'Achilas Matzah, V'hani Nashinami Ho V'Yeshnu B'Val Tochol Chametz, Yeshnu B'Kum Ochel Matzah. Because we know that women are chayev in the issur of chametz, we know that they're also included in the positive mitzvah of matzah. What's the connection between them? So that's what the pasuk is teaching. It's not just about the wheat. It's that there's a fundamental connection between the chametz and matzah, and that matzah derives from the confrontation from chametz. And therefore we know somebody who is over the prohibition, somebody who's included in the prohibition of chametz, naturally is going to be included in the mitzvah of matzah. Now this is said most starkly by the Yerushalmi in source number 13, who creates a new category. We know that women are pater mitzvah sheses man grama. So why are they chayev in matzah? So the Yerushalmi says, Amar Ramana, Chomer hi mitzvah aseh sheiba mikoach lo taseh. Because this is a new idea. There's a mitzvah aseh shezman grama, and there's a mitzvah aseh that comes from a lo taseh. What does that mean, that it comes from a lo taseh? So the Yerushalmi is telling you that the positive mitzvah of matzah, it's a new aseh. It comes from the lo taseh. The lo taseh is chametz. But that's the integration between the two. That the whole mitzvah of matzah is really a confrontation. It's a confrontation with chametz. And perhaps the most poignant expression of this idea that it's the confrontation, it's when the stakes are high, and it's your shmira that stops it, is a unbelievable minhag that the best matzah, when is the best time to bake matzah? What is the most precious matzah? When do you bake the most precious matzah? On Erev Pesach, after Chatzos. Now, with all of the safeguarding we do, to not come even close to a smidgen of possibly owning chametz and violating any of the isurim, just in case you forgot and you had it in your house with the bedika and the bittul and the beer and everything you're doing, after chatzos, you go to the bakery, or you go to the fire, and you bake the matzah, putting yourself at the greatest risk to violate the issur of owning chametz. Why do we possibly do that? And how is that the most muhudar and the best matzah? Because that exactly is the point. That matzah is dafka when the stakes are high. It's when there is risk, that it's our shmira, it's our actions, that we make sure it doesn't get to become chametz, that we make it matzah. That's the best matzah. And when it's time after chatzos, when the stakes are highest, that the matzah is more muhudar. This is the message of matzah. At the moment we're granted our freedom from being slaves, matzah teaches us that we forge our character, both individually and communally, specifically in moments when our attention and focus matter. Matzah emerges from a world where the prospect of chametz is possible, because without the possibility of chametz, there is nothing at stake. Like matzah, our personal and national character are forged specifically for moments when our actions make the most difference. This past year has been an exercise in operating under these circumstances. We have learned to pay close attention to activities we rarely thought much about. How close we are standing to one another. Did I bring a mask? Who have I been in contact with? For the entire world, the stakes have been high. But if there's any lesson from the character of matzah, is that true character is specifically formed in such moments. It's when the stakes are high that heroes are born. And over the past year, I've seen a lot of heroes in our community, including our Rosh Yeshiva, our faculty, our staff, our alumni, our students. Our care and concern for the safety, well-being, and dignity of others have served as a stark reminder of the power and potential of our actions. When so much has been at stake, we have risen together as a community and embraced the opportunity of the moment, realizing the gravity and power of our actions. But this message is not just for this year. We live in an era of unprecedented opportunity. And this is essential. You will hear many messages from me in your years at Yeshiva University. You will hear me speak about our 5 core values in truth and life, human dignity and faith. You'll hear all of that. But if there's one message I pray that you take from me in your years at Yeshiva University, let this be the message. We live in an era of unprecedented opportunity. You are able to model our values today and influence society in ways unimaginable in history. You will graduate from here into communal roles and professional positions of all levels of success, and will have access to all levels of power and influence. From the menschlichkeit in the way you interact with others, to the honesty and integrity in which you carry yourself in the workplace, to the ideals in which you will live your lives, people will see you and be influenced by you. As such, you have an enormous opportunity to exemplify, present, and communicate our values to both the broader Jewish world and the nations of the world. And people are interested. The Torah, its ideas and its values are our wisdom. It is our truth. And what we uniquely can do in our community is to spread that truth, to be exemplars of that truth, and to have it as our mission to project that truth. And you see it this year, the way the news spotlights the actions of traditional communities, the enormous possibility of making a Kiddush Hashem, and Chas v'Shalom, a Chilul Hashem. This is our historic mission. This is a unique way that we can move history forward and help bring the Geula by sanctifying God's name and spreading God's values. Here in Yeshiva, you learn all the values in your studies. You learn it through the Gemara. You learn it through morning to the afternoon. You learn it in everything that you're doing. You learn it when the Torah, it comes from the Torah, every daf, every pasuk, you're learning it. You exemplify them in your actions with your fellow students and interactions with peers and professionals. And all of this is to prepare you for a lifetime of impact as a leader in the world of tomorrow. And this is Matzoh. If you look at the last source on the page, the Medrash says, Ushmartem es hamatzos, al tikrakein, el ushmartem es hamitzvos. Kederach shein machmitzin es hamatzah, kach ein machmitzin es hamitzvah. El imba mitzvah liyadcha asay oso miyad. Ushmartem es hamatzos, it's not just being careful in Zahir when the stakes are high to make sure that it stays matzah. Ushmartem es hamitzvos. Don't let the matzah leaven, don't let the mitzvos leaven. When an opportunity comes to your hands, grab it, do it, seize it. Chametz is opportunity slipping away, it leavens and rises. Matzah is when you intervene and seize the opportunity and make the most of it. This message has been made obvious this year, and it's my wish to all of you, as we hopefully are turning a corner on this year-long battle, that we all remember the enduring character lesson from the mitzvah of matzah, that our actions matter. Each of us matters. And when the stakes are highest, as it is today, because of the enormous opportunity that exists today for each of you, we have the potential to truly distinguish ourselves. I wish each and every one of you a chag, kasher v'sameach, a happy and healthy Pesach.